appreciate, to show solidarity and to show support to these military interventions. Some of us have equally gone on the streets, on media, to critique against these interventions. But often we don't get to discuss the real context and issues that led to the rise of these military interventions and coup d'etats across the continent. First, we have to know that military coup d'etats is not something that is new. It's not something that just come from nowhere, from 2021, 2022, 2023. No. We, as Africans at independence, have realized that one of the easiest instrument and tool used by external forces to eliminate the very good leaders that championed Africa's independence were actually removed through military men, turning civilians, turning military men against the vision and pattern set by the leaders that delivered them not only independence, but wanted to take Africa to the promised land, a united Africa, an Africa that is free to produce evenly, but an Africa that is ready to own her own destiny. All of us will remember the military coup d'etat that took place in Togo in the 1963, leading to the death of Olympia. We will equally see subsequent coup d'etats that occurs after this. And we have equally seen the involvement of external forces that were at the time using not only the Gambia or other African countries individually, but have used citizens of Africans, have used mercenary groups to uproot the very leaders that uphold the fundamental values of Pan-Africanism and have put their life, their time and resources into engineering an Africa that delivers not only success stories, but an Africa that lives and has her position in international politics and international situations by having a voice that counts. Most African leaders that were visionary enough and emphasis leadership, African leaders that wanted to deliver economic progress, African leaders that had sat down and said, we can do it as Africans, and Africa is able to hold the fundamental needs and cater for her own people. These individuals have been eliminated. Whether it was prominent leaders that emanate in Nigeria, whether it was prominent African leaders that emanates from Tanzania, whether it was prominent African leaders from Kenya or prominent African leaders from other African countries, and we can name them over and over. What we have come to realize is these very individuals with their entire vision and development agendas have been narrowed to nothing but assassinated or equally just be eliminated in one way or the other and exiled in some situation. This Africa have been there. But what we now see is the shift in that. That today, it is not the military men who were exploited and used by external forces to end visionary leadership in the continent, but young, prominent Africans who have joined military to serve their people for the interest of Africa and for the interest of the resources that we have from within. These individuals, in some situations, have learned to realize that the continued exploitation of African resources has to have an end. The continued marginalization of the African people have to have an end. And Africa must distribute her resources to fit the purpose and needs of the people who live within it. We have seen the new rise. To give it a context, in the case of Niger, we've seen a recent seize of power. We do not support for militaries to go everywhere and take charge. But one thing we can support is a good change. Think about Niger. Think about Mali in your analysis. Think about Burkina Faso in your analysis. These are countries that gained independence in the early 1960s. But what have they done from that moment to date? It will be understood that in the case of Niger, how many leaders have come in and go? And as we speak, over 70% of the population do not have access to electricity. As we speak, there is high rate of illiteracy. As we speak, there is high rate of unemployment. As we speak, the future of young individuals who should be championing development cause, who should be big entrepreneurs, providing solutions for not only Niger, but other African countries, have narrowed their dreams to nothing but being on the streets. Our own brothers and sisters who have traveled through the Mediterranean Sea have had their experience before they got to Libya. Agadez is one of the renowned regions, had through the stories of these very individuals. You ask, in their interventions, they've realized the lack of amenities, basic needs, which are not available. When we think about a region like Mali today, with all the world resources present, and have always lived to be in a situation in which nothing has been done to support or to end the continued marginalization of the people of Mali. Leadership keep coming. We have an organization, not only the African Union, but regional blocs like the ECOWAS, and the name goes on, which have narrowed their vision and agendas to nothing but a protective club for the few members. We have seen heads of state that refuse to step down after their second term in office, torn the constitution under the watch of ECOWAS and the AU, who did nothing to remove these individuals, just because they belong to that accepted club. But what happened afterward? When military men said enough is enough, that's when you run to the sanctions. That's when you run to the emergency meetings. That's when you run, born in state resources, threatening young civilians, threatening youths whose future you have sold to outsiders. That's the Africa we live in. And that is the reality at the moment. What we are seeing is a new wave of African youths whom the leaders have refused to listen to. This call have been there. For the past 5-10 years, youths along the continent are asking burning questions about the future of the continent. Whether it is in the street of the Gambia, how you hear the youths talking about their disagreement with the establishment. Whether it is youths in Mali, whether it is youths in Togo, whether it is youths in different African countries, who are making their voices to be heard. They speak into the leadership that we disagree. We are not in agreement with what you are doing. You have continuously looted our resources. In fact, the biggest entity today to make fortune is nothing but politics in Africa, when it should have been the opposite. When you opt to go into political office, you opt to deliver services. You campaign on promises. But what we see is the reverse. After a few years in those positions, we have seen leaders who sacrificed ambitious youths, whether it was the Lekki massacre in Nigeria under the NSAS protests, whether it is the continuous exploitations and deaths of Africans in the Amazonia region of the Cameroons, whether it is the continuous exploitation and the unending issues that are happening within all the African countries, there is a concern. There is a concern at the moment, and we have to rise. We have to speak truth. Yes, we need a constitutional change of power. But what do you do when people come in, grip into the political space, exploit the state resources, turn the democratic institutions into tissue papers that they can use and throw whenever they feel like? What do you do in that situation? So yes, they can gather and make the meetings over and over, but the voice is hard. And yes, if you do not listen to the cries of the youths, you must be ready to harness whatever comes with it. And that is what Africa is facing today. Think about a country like France, with all the resources that is present in her country today. Most of the uraniums that they're extracting from the African continent is extracted in countries like Niger, Nigeria, and few others. Not that they don't have uranium, they do. They reserve it for the future. They've exploited the very best of their own and have turned to the Africans to save them. And you know what happened with that? What happened is, in as early as 1975, by 1950, for the first time, France has begun extracting more resources than it have or than it produced locally. By 1975, they were doing more of uranium outside of France than they could do within France. Today, they have powered their nuclear powers, they've powered their nuclear programs, they've promised and delivered their people with good electricity, they've promised them that security-wise, you are safe forever. They've promised them many things, and they're delivering to their people. But we equally have leaders who promise us the same thing, yet allow to be used by that same France to establish, to promote whatever that is good for her people. How many African youths today do we see? Whether they're dying through the Mediterranean Sea, whether they're using other means in order to enter Europe, or whether they are using all kinds of ways just because they want to leave the territories of this continent because they have no hope. Think about business within the continent. Think about economic prospects. Think about the young African women that I have came across time without numbers on different flights, some of them with good skills. Some of them could be professional hairdressers. Some of them could be graduates from universities. Some of them have acquired engineering skills. But with all this, they've narrowed it down into what? Just becoming a caretaker in a home in Lebanon, a caretaker in the Gulf. They've narrowed down their futures. And these are the individuals that we, you and I, are waiting for. When we go to hospitals, we do not have enough doctors. We do not have enough lawyers. We do not have even enough security personnel. We don't have all this. But yet the people who are supposed to man these positions, we are narrowing their future. We are narrowing their careers into what? Just caretakers in Lebanon. Under our watch, this is happening. So yes, it is alarming. And I can tell you this, now and forever, with these factors constant, EU is never going to give us the solution. ECOWAS can do nothing to end the military interventions. They have happened, they will be here, they will live with us, and they will continue to happen in as much as leaders don't respond to the needs of the people. They are here to stay. That's the fact. We have all seen the young man, Ibrahim Touray, in the summit in Russia, as if he had a phone conversation with the ancestors before giving that submission. Indeed, those are the burning questions that young people everywhere are asking. And we must do something about it. It's either we deliberately find answers and provide alternative. Let us respond to the needs, to the desires of the people. They put us in power for a purpose, and that purpose must be met. Governments in Africa must stop to use state resources and institutions for their private gain. And this is what we are seeing across. If you continue to do things that way and still believe that you can be in power forever, that's the biggest joke. These young men have done nothing but liberated their own people. And yes, we are not saying all military men have come in and delivered solutions. Some of them have been worse than civilian regimes. But we just cannot afford to not have a change. That's the fact. There must be a change. People need to see changes happening. Governments everywhere around the world are thinking about their solution first. Solutions for their countries. Today the world, the global discourse on climate change, solutions, and the list goes on. In Africa, the biggest problem is bread and butter. People are not finding it possible to have something to eat. It's becoming difficult in every sector. Yes, you told us to integrate, but yet the unending protocols is killing business within Africa. You look at the continent's internal trade from within. Huge obstacles. How many Africans today can move containers from one African country to another? You don't build an economy that is extract-based, leaving a huge margin of your population. And that's why we have the problem. Most African